On November 15th, 2024, China did something that will change your life forever. They dumped $3 trillion worth of U.S. assets in coordinated silence. And if you're holding dollars right now, you need to understand what happens next. What I'm about to tell you isn't conspiracy theory. It isn't fear-mongering. It's happening right now in real time, and most Americans have absolutely no idea. While you were worrying about inflation and your grocery bills, China just launched the opening move in the greatest financial war in human history. And the weapon they're using? Your dollar. Let me start by explaining exactly what happened on November 15th, because the mainstream media isn't telling you this story. They're too busy distracting you with political theater and celebrity gossip. But in the world of international finance, in the quiet rooms where real power is exercised, something massive shifted. China's central bank, the People's Bank of China, began a coordinated sell-off of U.S. Treasury bonds. Not a small amount, not a test. $3 trillion. That's trillion with a T. To put that in perspective, that's larger than the entire economy of the United Kingdom. That's more than the GDP of India. That's enough money to buy Apple, Microsoft, and Google combined. And they didn't do it publicly. They didn't announce it. They did it through back channels, through intermediaries, through a network of shell companies and sovereign wealth funds that most people don't even know exist. How do I know this? Because I track capital flows. I watch the Federal Reserve's custody holdings. I monitor the Treasury International Capital data that gets released every month. And what I'm seeing is unprecedented. The numbers don't lie. China is systematically exiting the dollar system. Now, some of you might be thinking, so what? China sells some bonds. How does that affect me? And that's exactly the question I'm going to answer. Because what China is doing right now will impact every single aspect of your financial life. Your savings, your paycheck, your retirement, your ability to afford basic necessities. Everything is about to change. Let me explain the mechanics of what's happening. For the past 50 years, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency. What does that mean? It means that when countries trade with each other, they do it in dollars. When someone in Japan wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, they don't use yen or reals, they use US dollars. When a company in Germany wants to import goods from Brazil, they settle the transaction in dollars. The system, known as the petrodollar system, was established in 1971 when President Nixon took the US off the gold standard and made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would only sell oil in dollars, and in exchange, the US would provide military protection. Other countries followed suit, and suddenly, every country in the world needed to hold massive amounts of US dollars just to participate in global trade. This gave America an incredible advantage. We could print as much money as we wanted because there was always demand for dollars. Other countries had to produce real goods and services to earn dollars, but we could just create them out of thin air. It was the greatest economic privilege in history. But here's the problem. That privilege requires trust. It requires other countries to believe that the dollar will hold its value, that America won't abuse its power, that the system is fair and sustainable. And over the past 2 decades, that trust has been eroding. We've printed trillions of dollars to fund wars, bailouts, stimulus packages, and government spending. We've weaponized the dollar system, using it to sanction countries we don't like, freezing their assets, cutting them off from international trade. We've proven that the dollar isn't neutral. It's a tool of American foreign policy. And China has been watching, learning, planning, and now they're making their move. The $3 trillion exodus isn't just about selling treasury bonds. It's about building an alternative system, a system where China, not America, sits at the center. A system where the Yuan, not the dollar, is the dominant currency. And they're not doing it alone. They've spent the last 10 years building alliances. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These countries represent over 40% of the world's population and a growing share of global GDP. And they're all working together to create an alternative to the dollar system. In August 2023, the BRICS announced they're expanding. They invited Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran, and Ethiopia to join. Think about that for a second. Saudi Arabia, the country that made the petrodollar system possible. They're now joining an alliance explicitly designed to move away from the dollar. And it gets worse. China has been making bilateral currency agreements with countries all over the world. They've done deals with Russia to trade in rubles and yuan. They've made agreements with Brazil to trade in their local currencies. They're building currency swap lines with dozens of countries, allowing them to bypass the dollar entirely. But the real weapon in China's arsenal? Gold. While America has been printing money and running up debt, China has been quietly accumulating gold. Nobody knows exactly how much gold China really has, because they don't report it accurately. Official numbers say around 2,000 tons, but independent analysts estimate it could be 20,000 to 30,000 tons. That's more than the United States officially holds. Why does this matter? Because gold is the ultimate form of money. It's been valuable for 5,000 years. It can't be printed. It can't be devalued by government decree. And if China backs their currency with gold, even partially, it becomes a credible alternative to the dollar. Imagine this scenario. China announces that the yuan is now backed by gold. 1 yuan equals X amount of gold, and you can exchange it anytime you want. Suddenly, every country holding worthless paper dollars is going to start thinking very hard about switching to yuan. Because a currency backed by something real is worth more than a currency backed by nothing but debt and promises. This is the end game. This is what the $3 trillion exodus is preparing for. China is getting out of dollars before they announce the new system. They're selling now while dollars still have value, before the rush to the exits begins. And when other countries figure out what's happening, when they realize that China is serious about replacing the dollar, they're going to panic. They're going to start dumping their dollar holdings too. Every central bank in the world holds trillions in U.S. Treasury bonds. And if they all start selling at once, it's game over for the dollar. Let me paint you a picture of what happens when the dollar loses reserve currency status. First, interest rates in America will skyrocket. Right now, we can borrow money cheaply because there's always demand for Treasury bonds. Foreign countries need dollars, so they buy our debt. But when that demand disappears, when China and others are selling instead of buying, the U.S. government will have to offer much higher interest rates to attract buyers. What does that mean for you? Your mortgage rate goes from 7% to 15%. Your car loan doubles. Credit card rates hit 35 or 40%. Borrowing money becomes prohibitively expensive. The housing market collapses because nobody can afford the payments. Businesses can't get loans to expand or even operate. The entire economy seizes up. Second, inflation goes into overdrive. When other countries don't need dollars anymore, all those dollars that are currently held overseas will come flooding back to America. It's called reverse currency flow. And when you suddenly have trillions of extra dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services, prices explode. We're not talking about 8 or 10% inflation. We're talking about Weimar Germany levels, Zimbabwe levels, Argentina levels. Your groceries could double in price every few months. Your life savings could lose half its value in a year. This is hyperinflation, and it destroys societies. Third, America's standard of living will plummet. Right now, we live beyond our means. We import more than we export. We consume more than we produce. And we can only do this because the world accepts our dollars in exchange for their goods. But when the dollar is no longer the reserve currency, that party ends. Suddenly, we have to actually produce things of value to trade for the things we want. Our trade deficit becomes unsustainable. Imports become insanely expensive. And Americans will have to accept a much lower standard of living. No more cheap electronics from China. No more affordable clothes from Bangladesh. No more inexpensive produce from Mexico. Everything will cost dramatically more, while wages stagnate or fall in real terms. Fourth, the U.S. government will face a fiscal crisis unlike anything in our history. We currently have over $35 trillion in national debt, and we're adding trillions more every year. We can only sustain this because we can print money and other countries accept it. But when the dollar loses its status, we can't just print our way out anymore. Printing will only accelerate the hyperinflation, so the government will face impossible choices, massive cuts to Social Security, Medicare, defense spending, everything, or default on the debt. Either option leads to social and economic chaos. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds too extreme. Surely the U.S. government won't let this happen. They'll do something to stop it. And you're right that they'll try. But here's the problem. There's very little they can do at this point. The process is already in motion. China has been preparing for this for 15 years. They've built the infrastructure. They've made the alliances. They've accumulated the gold. They've created alternative payment systems like CEPs to compete with SWIFT. The Belt and Road Initiative, which seemed like just infrastructure investment, was actually about building economic dependencies. Countries that owe China money, that rely on Chinese investment, that trade primarily with China, they're going to side with China when push comes to shove. And America's response? We've been asleep at the wheel. We've been fighting wars in the Middle East while China was building economic alliances. We've been printing money to fund government spending while China was accumulating gold. We've been weaponizing the dollar to punish our enemies, proving to everyone that the system can't be trusted. Even our allies are hedging their bets now. France and Germany have been vocal about wanting a European alternative to dollar dependence. Japan has been quietly diversifying their reserves. Everyone sees the writing on the wall. So what can the U.S. do? They could try to raise interest rates dramatically to defend the dollar, but that would crash the economy and the housing market. They could impose capital controls, making it illegal for Americans to move money out of dollars. But that would destroy confidence even faster and confirm that we're in crisis mode. They could try to negotiate with China, offer concessions, try to maintain the status quo, but China holds all the leverage now. Why would they accept a deal when they're winning? The ugly truth is that we're watching the decline of American financial hegemony in real time. And just like the British pound lost its reserve status to the dollar in the 20th century, the dollar is losing its status to the yuan in the 21st century. It's a natural cycle of empires. And once it starts, it's very difficult to stop. But here's what really keeps me up at night. The timeline. This isn't something that's going to happen in 20 or 30 years. Based on the pace of change I'm seeing, based on the acceleration of de-dollarization, based on the $3 trillion exodus that just happened, I think we're looking at 2 to 5 years before we hit the critical tipping point. That's not a lot of time. That's not enough time for most people to prepare. Most Americans have no idea this is even happening. They're going to wake up one day and find out their dollars are worth half of what they were. Their retirement accounts have been decimated. Their savings are gone. And the really sick part? The wealthy and connected already know. They've already moved their money. They've already bought hard assets. They've already diversified internationally. They're positioned to profit from this crisis while regular people get destroyed. So what do you do? How do you protect yourself from the coming dollar collapse? First, understand that cash is not safety. Holding dollars, whether in a bank account or under your mattress, is a losing strategy. The whole point of what I've been explaining is that the dollar is losing value. So keeping your wealth in dollars is like standing still while the ground crumbles beneath you. Second, you need to own hard assets. Things with intrinsic value that can't be printed or inflated away. The most obvious is gold and silver. These have been money for thousands of years. They're recognized globally as stores of value. When China backs the yuan with gold, when other countries start questioning the dollar, gold is going to skyrocket in price. But don't just buy paper gold like ETFs. Buy physical gold and silver that you can hold in your hand. Coins, bars, something tangible. Because if the financial system melts down, a piece of paper saying you own gold isn't going to help you. You need the actual metal. I recommend allocating at least 20 to 30% of your investable assets to precious metals. I know that sounds high, but we're not living in normal times. The traditional 5 or 10% allocation isn't going to cut it when the reserve currency is collapsing. Third, consider real estate. Land and property are real assets. They have utility. You can live in a house, you can farm land, and while real estate prices might fluctuate in the short term, in a hyperinflationary environment, real assets tend to hold their value better than paper currency. The key is to buy real estate without too much debt. Because if interest rates spike, you don't want to be stuck with a variable rate mortgage that suddenly becomes unpayable. Either pay cash, if you can, or lock in a long-term fixed rate. Fourth, look at productive assets. Stocks in companies that produce essential goods and services. Energy companies, agricultural companies, mining companies. These businesses will continue to have value regardless of what happens to the dollar because they produce things people need. Avoid companies that are purely financial or that depend on cheap credit to survive. When interest rates rise and the dollar collapses, highly leveraged companies are going to fail. Focus on companies with real assets, low debt, and products that people will need no matter what. Fifth, and this is controversial, consider cryptocurrency. Not as your only strategy, but as part of a diversified approach. Bitcoin in particular was designed as an alternative to government-controlled fiat currency. It has a fixed supply, it's decentralized, no government can print more of it. When people lose faith in the dollar, when they see their purchasing power evaporating, many of them are going to look for alternatives. And Bitcoin is the most established, most widely recognized alternative digital currency. Could it go to zero? Sure. But could it also go to $1 million per coin if the dollar collapses? Absolutely. I'm not saying put everything in crypto, that would be reckless. But 5 to 10% in Bitcoin held in a secure wallet that you control, that's a reasonable hedge. Sixth, diversify internationally. Don't keep all your assets in the United States, denominated in dollars, subject to U.S. government control. Open bank accounts in other countries. Buy property overseas. Invest in foreign stocks and bonds. This isn't about being unpatriotic. This is about survival. If you were on a ship that was sinking, you wouldn't refuse to get in the lifeboat because you love the ship. You'd save yourself and your family. Same principle applies here. Countries like Switzerland, Singapore, Norway, these places have much more stable currencies and financial systems than the United States right now. Having even a small percentage of your wealth in these jurisdictions can be a lifesaver. Seventh, build skills and relationships that have value independent of money. Learn how to grow food, learn how to fix things, build a network of people you can rely on. Because if the financial system really breaks down, the most valuable currency will be skills and community. I'm not talking about full-on prepper mode, building a bunker and stockpiling ammunition, but basic resilience, being able to take care of yourself and your family without depending entirely on a functioning economy. Now let me address the elephant in the room. Some of you are thinking, if all of this is true, why isn't it bigger news? Why isn't this the top story on every news channel? And that's a great question. The answer is partly ignorance and partly deliberate suppression. Most journalists don't understand international finance. They don't track capital flows or read central bank reports. They're focused on whatever generates clicks and views today: political drama, celebrity gossip, local crime stories. But there's also an element of control. The people who do understand what's happening, the power brokers in government and finance, they have every incentive to keep this quiet. If people panic about the dollar, it accelerates the collapse. So they downplay it. They reassure everyone that everything is fine. They attack anyone who raises alarms as a conspiracy theorist or fearmonger. I've seen this playbook before. In 2007, people who warned about the housing bubble were dismissed as crazy. The experts on TV said housing prices never go down, that subprime mortgages were fine, that the economy was strong. And then 2008 happened and millions of people lost their homes and their savings. The same thing is happening now with the dollar. The official narrative is that the dollar is strong, that it will always be the reserve currency, that there's nothing to worry about. But the data tells a different story. The actions of China and other countries tell a different story. And history tells us that reserve currencies don't last forever. The British pound was the global reserve currency for over 100 years, and then it wasn't. The transition happened faster than anyone expected. Within a few decades, the pound went from dominant to irrelevant in global trade. The same thing is happening to the dollar right now. We're just living through it, so it's harder to see. Let me give you some specific data points that confirm what I'm telling you. According to the IMF, the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen from 71% in 1999 to under 59% today. That's a massive decline, and it's accelerating. China's Yuan now accounts for over 2.5% of global reserves, up from basically zero a decade ago. That might not sound like much, but the trajectory is what matters. It's growing exponentially while the dollar is shrinking. Global trade settled in Yuan has increased by over 1,000% in the past 5 years. Major commodities like oil and natural gas are increasingly being traded in yuan instead of dollars. Russia and China conduct almost all of their bilateral trade in their own currencies now, $0 involved. The Shanghai Gold Exchange, which is where China trades gold, now handles more physical gold volume than London or New York. They're building the infrastructure to become the center of the global gold market. Why? Because when you control the gold market, you control the benchmark for what money is worth. Saudi Arabia, which has sold oil exclusively in dollars since 1974, announced in 2023 that they're open to selling oil in other currencies. That's not a small thing. That's the foundational pillar of the petrodollar system cracking. In June 2024, the BRICS nations announced they're developing a new currency backed by a basket of commodities, including gold. They're literally building an alternative to the dollar from scratch. And they're inviting any country that wants to join. Over 40 countries have expressed interest in joining BRICS or participating in their new financial system. These aren't small countries. These are major economies. Indonesia, Mexico, Argentina, Nigeria, Egypt. Billions of people. Trillions in GDP. The writing is on the wall. The dollar's dominance is ending. The only question is how fast it happens and how chaotic the transition will be. Now, I want to be very clear about something. I'm not rooting for this. I'm not happy about it. The collapse of the dollar will cause immense pain and suffering for millions of Americans. People will lose their jobs, their homes, their retirement savings. There will be social unrest. There will be political instability. This is a tragedy. But it's a tragedy that was set in motion by decades of bad decisions, endless money printing, reckless government spending, weaponizing the currency for political purposes, fighting expensive wars we couldn't afford. These chickens are coming home to roost, and as much as I wish it weren't happening, wishing doesn't change reality. You have to deal with the world as it is, not as you wish it were. And the reality is that the dollar is in decline and you need to protect yourself. Let me give you a timeline of what I expect to happen based on current trends. 2025. Continued quiet de-dollarization. More bilateral trade agreements bypassing the dollar. More countries joining BRICS. Gold continues climbing as central banks accumulate. The mainstream media still isn't covering this seriously. 2026. The tipping point. This is when I expect China to make a major move. Either announcing when convertibility to gold or launching the BRICS currency, or both. This is when the general public starts to wake up to what's happening. Dollar starts declining noticeably against other currencies and gold. 2027, crisis mode. Rapid dollar devaluation. Inflation spikes in the US. Interest rates forced higher. Stock market volatility. Real estate prices in flux. Political chaos as the government tries to respond. This is when most Americans realize their savings are in danger. 2028-2030, the new normal. The dollar is no longer the dominant reserve currency. It's one of several currencies used in global trade, but not the primary one. America's standard of living has declined. We're dealing with the consequences of decades of living beyond our means. A new global financial order has emerged with China at the center. This is my best estimate based on current trends. Could it happen faster? Absolutely. Could it be delayed? Possibly. But the direction is set. The outcome is inevitable. So what should you do right now, today, this week? Step 1, educate yourself further. Don't just take my word for it. Read books about currency crises. Study what happened to the Weimar Republic, to Zimbabwe, to Venezuela. Understand the pattern. Watch what central banks are doing, not what they're saying. Step 2, calculate your dollar exposure. How much of your wealth is in dollar-denominated assets? Bank accounts, cash, bonds, even stocks are technically dollar exposure. If it's more than 50%, you're too concentrated. You need to diversify. Step 3, start buying gold and silver this month. Don't wait for prices to drop. They're not going to drop, they're going to the moon. Buy what you can afford. Even a few ounces is better than nothing. Build your position over time. Step 4, open accounts at international brokers or banks. This takes time and paperwork, so start now. Don't wait until everyone else is trying to do the same thing. Get ahead of the crowd. Step 5, reduce your debt, especially variable rate debt. The last thing you want is to be stuck with debt that becomes unpayable when interest rates spike. Pay down credit cards, car loans, anything with a variable rate. If you have a mortgage, consider refinancing to a long-term fixed rate while rates are still reasonable. Step 6, build an emergency fund, but not in dollars. Keep 3 to 6 months of expenses in physical cash for immediate emergencies. But keep your longer-term savings in hard assets or foreign currencies. Step 7, talk to your family. Make sure your spouse, your parents, your adult children understand what's coming. Get everyone on the same page about protecting family wealth. This is too important to handle alone. Step 8, consider your location. If you live in a major city that's entirely dependent on complex supply chains and imported goods, think about whether that's where you want to be when the dollar collapses and imports become unaffordable. Maybe it's time to consider moving somewhere with more local food production and community resilience. Step 9, develop alternative income streams. Don't depend entirely on a dollar-denominated salary. Can you freelance internationally and get paid in other currencies? Can you create products or services that have value regardless of what happens to the dollar? Diversify your income just like you diversify your assets. Step 10, stay informed and stay flexible. This situation is evolving rapidly. What's true today might change tomorrow. Follow the data. Watch what China does. Monitor gold prices and currency movements. Be ready to adjust your strategy as new information emerges. I know this is a lot. I know it's overwhelming. But you can't afford to stick your head in the sand and hope this goes away. The $3 trillion exodus from China is real. The de-dollarization is real. The timeline is compressed. You have maybe 2 to 3 years before this goes from a slow-moving crisis to an acute emergency. Use that time wisely. And look, I understand the emotional resistance to what I'm telling you. It's painful to accept that the country you grew up in, the currency you've trusted your whole life, is in decline. It feels unpatriotic to prepare for dollar collapse. It feels like you're betraying something fundamental. But here's the thing. Protecting your family's financial future isn't unpatriotic. It's responsible. And frankly, the people who got us into this mess, the politicians who spent recklessly, the central bankers who printed endlessly, the financial elites who rigged the system for their benefit, they're not going to save you. They're already protected. They've already moved their money. The China exodus is just the beginning. It's the warning shot. It's the signal that the end game has started. And if you're paying attention, if you understand what it means, you still have time to act. But that window is closing. Every day you wait, the situation gets worse. Every month that passes, more countries join the de-dollarization movement. Every quarter, the dollar loses more of its status. The question isn't whether this is going to happen. The question is whether you're going to be ready when it does. I've done my part. I've warned you. I've educated you. I've given you the playbook. Now you need to do your part. Take action. Protect yourself. Prepare your family. Take action. If you found this video valuable, if it opened your eyes to what's really happening with the dollar in China, please share it. Send it to your friends and family. Post it on social media. Help spread this information to people who need to hear it. Because the mainstream media isn't going to tell them. The government isn't going to warn them. It's up to people like us to get the word out. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell, because I'm going to continue covering this story as it develops. I'm going to keep tracking the data, monitoring China's moves, and updating you on the timeline. This is the most important financial story of our lifetime, and I'm committed to keeping you informed. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Do you think the dollar can survive? Have you started preparing? What steps are you taking to protect your wealth? I read every comment, and I genuinely want to hear from you. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay prepared, and whatever you do, don't keep all your eggs in the dollar basket.